Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today's featured guest is Jeff Zentner, an author with a quite interesting background. Jeff is the author of the New York Times notable books The Serpent King, which is set in the South. According to Book Browse, this Southern Gothic novel is, quote, a touching debut that chronicles the coming of age of three high school seniors, misfits and best friends, in a sepia-toned portrait of small-town life, unquote. Penguin Random House calls In the Wild Light, quote, a poignant coming-of-age novel about two best friends whose friendship is tested when they get the opportunity to leave their impoverished small town for an elite prep school, unquote. The Dallas Public Library sees Goodbye Days as, quote, a story about Carver, a 17-year-old boy who, with the power of a 7-word text, believes he is responsible for the deaths of his three best friends, unquote. Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee is viewed by Foggy Pine Books as, quote, a contemporary novel about two best friends who must make tough decisions about their futures and the TV show they host in their senior year of high school, unquote. Yes, Jeff Zentner's characters experience a bit of angst in his novels. By the way, Jeff has a forthcoming debut novel for the adult market entitled Colton Gentry's Third Act. Among his many awards and honors, Jeff Zentner has won the ALA's William C. Morris Award, the Amelia Elizabeth Walden Award twice, the New Jersey Council of Teachers of English Muriel R. Becker Award for Outstanding YA Literature, the International Literacy Association Award, and he has been long-listed twice for the Carnegie Medal. This two-time Southern Book Prize finalist was also a finalist for the Indies Choice Award. He was selected as a Publishers Weekly Flying Start awardee and an Indies Introduce pick. His books have been translated into 15 languages. Besides having a career as a writer, Jeff Zentner has connections with the world of music. Before becoming a writer, he was a musician who recorded with Iggy Pop, Nick Cave, and Debbie Harry. Debbie Harry, of course, was with the group Blondie. Jeff presently lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Jeff Zentner, welcome, and thank you for taking an author's journey with us today.
Thanks, Joseph. It's great to be here.
Jeff, your career as a musician brought you opportunities to create music with some impressive names that I have just mentioned. Was music your first love?
It was. When I was a teenager, I was really obsessed with two things. I was obsessed with books and I was obsessed with music. And I started, when I was about 17 or 18, I started to feel this kind of profound hunger to be more of an active participant in creating art. And I figured if I was going to become a creator, it would need to be one of the things I felt passionately about. Now, I ruled out books, surprisingly enough, almost immediately, because my assumption was that books just kind of descended from ivory towers written by mystical people who were very different from me. I grew up in a pre-internet age. There was no going on Instagram and seeing favorite authors being goofy, normal human beings. I just assumed that they were these magical people with incredible abilities beyond my own, fancy college degrees, all sorts of things. So books I ruled out immediately, and I focused on music instead, which seemed a lot more attainable.
Was there a certain aspect of music that pulled you to it, that was your siren?
I got into music through blues. I was a blues lover. There was a radio station in my hometown that played a blues show on Saturday nights, and I would listen to this show, and I was so compelled by the mood of the music, by the emotionality of it, by the kind of raw feeling that was on display, and it really connected with me. It struck me as this is the purpose of art. To exercise our demons, to work out things, to express feeling, to express humanness, and that's what drew me into music.
Now, that propensity for the blues, was that in any way responsible for your urge to pursue a career in writing?
In a very roundabout sort of way. Basically, I pursued music all through my 20s. And when I hit my 30s, it finally occurred to me that very few people make it big in music after age 30. It really doesn't happen a lot. That window kind of seems to close. Now, you can be big in music after age 30, make no mistake, but you really have to have made your name in your 20s or even sooner. Um, so once I had figured out that I would probably not be able to make a living as a musician, I went out and got a grown up day job, and I started volunteering at a music camp for teenagers. I figured if I can't live the dream myself, maybe I can pass it on to someone who can. So I started volunteering at a music camp for teenagers, and that's where I fell in love with young adults, and particularly the way they identify with the art that they love. And it made me want to create art for young adults. And so I looked around for what could I do to make art for young adults? What is still available to me? And I noticed two things. First of all, that publishing is much more forgiving of age, right? Toni Morrison, I think, published her first book in her early 40s. So you don't have to be under age 30 to get a break in publishing. And second of all, that there was this big new publishing category called YA that was squarely targeted at the audience I wanted to reach. And so I said, hey, maybe this is a way that I can reach the audience I want to reach young adults. It will require me to switch horses. I'll have to figure out a new artistic discipline, but hey, I think it would be worthwhile. So that's what I did. So it's a very roundabout journey that got me from music to writing.
Now, do you still stay connected to the camps that you were volunteering at?
I do. I served on the board of directors of the camps for several years. I just stepped down a little while ago because I started a master's degree in information science, and it just was between the day job, the writing, family obligations, and the master's degree. I just couldn't handle a board of directorship, so I stepped down from that. But I do still stay involved, and I'm connected with that community.
That's great to hear. As a musician, were there skills that you had acquired as a musician that translated into your writing that maybe helped you to become a successful writer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first lesson that music taught me is that I have a process. I have a creative process, and I need to trust that process. I can't force it. I can't try to use someone else's creative process. I have a process that I use to express myself, a process by which I can access those ideas that I need to access, by which I can access those things that I need to say. So that's the first thing it taught me. The second thing it taught me is I have a voice. There is an emotional register I speak in through my music, and there's an emotional register that I speak in through my books. Now, just like with music, I love all sorts of music, but there is a kind of music that I make, and it taught me to look for the kind of stories that I tell. It's okay for me to love all sorts of stories, right? But there is a type of story that I tell, and I knew going into writing that I needed to seek out that type of story. It taught me to be comfortable with the process of revision. It taught me to be comfortable with rejection. It taught me that just like how not everybody loves every musician, not everybody loves every writer, just like how not everybody loves every song, not every song is going to connect with everybody, not every book is going to connect with everybody. I think the most important lesson, though, that it taught me was to not fear failure. Because in many ways, I did fail as a musician. I didn't end up ultimately making my living as a musician, which was what I wanted to do. So in that sense, I was a failure. In other senses, I was very successful, and I'm very happy with what I did. But in the sense of being able to make a living as a musician, I did fail. And I survived that failure. And what that taught me was to try things as an author, to try being an author, and to not fear failure, because you survive failure. Nobody's really keeping track of your failures. What we're really afraid of when we think we're afraid of failing is we're afraid of being seen to fail, I think. And music got me over that.
It sounds as if the challenges that you faced as a musician and some of the disappointments have actually been a gateway to your success as a writer. Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. If I could go back and do it again, and a wizard granted me 3 wishes and said, you can use one of your wishes to be a successful musician, but if you do that, there's no writing career for you. There's no way I would take that deal. The writing has been so rewarding to me, so valuable to me. There's nothing I would do different.
Now, in your writing, you have a particular style, and I'd like to mention what a couple of the critics have said. The Los Angeles Review of Books notes that, quote, many themes course through Zentner's books: love, loss, the challenge of facing an unknown future. But the lifeblood that nourishes them is friendship. The friendships we remember from our teen years that we never again attain in adulthood. The friendships that define who we have become, unquote. The review adds that, quote, artists, misfits, and underdogs will exult in Zentner's depiction of the power and necessity of friendship, especially those for whom friends are their chosen family, unquote. So I'm wondering, is there an incident, a series of incidents, maybe a little bit of insight that led you to focusing heavily on this concept that combines friendship with loss?
So the friendship piece, of course, I had wonderful groups of friends growing up, that served in many ways as found family, and so that informed my writing. Um, I have always loved books about friendship. When I was coming of age as a reader, there were some books about friendship that really had an impact on me. So The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, a real um, you know, testament to found family, to friendship. That one was a seminal book for me. Another one was the novella The Body by Stephen King, which was later adapted into the movie Stand By Me. Just a gorgeous depiction of friendship and the way friendships have their season and then sometimes move on, and the way other friendships survive. Stephen King's book It, that has a beautiful friendship at the core of this kind of terrifying horror story. Stephen King just writes beautifully about friendship. I'm a huge fan of his. And then when I was a younger reader, the book A House with a Clock in Its Walls, which is marked by the main character's loneliness in a lot of ways, the lack of friendship, and how he kind of comes into this found family. So all of those works really bore heavily on me. As for writing about loss, one of the purposes that art serves for me is to engage with difficult things from a safe space, to try to inoculate myself against those things to the extent that I can. And you can never really. But one of the things that frightens me a lot is loss, is grieving, losing people leaving your life in whatever way. And so that is something that I try to talk about in my work, that I try to access in my work as a way of contending with it before I actually face it.
Now, today's teenager, often teenagers in general, are accused of feeling that they're going to live forever. It's just a youthful exuberance. But we also now have teenagers who have gone through a pandemic that was unlike anything we have ever experienced. The last pandemic was over 100 years ago, and we didn't have the media to make it so immediate to all of us. And I think maybe one of the things that teenagers relate to so well with your stories is that you have a time in our lives where we've dealt with a pandemic, we have battles and wars and mistrust at many levels. Uh, and to be a kid today is not an easy thing. So maybe one of the attractions to what you write is that your voice is ringing true with your audience.
Well, I certainly hope that's the case. I will say, the experience of teenagers today is so different even from when I started writing for teenagers in about 2013. My first book came out in 2016. Um, and in many ways, the experience is foreign to me. My own teenagedom was very similar in many ways to teenagedoms of years past. I like to joke that my teenagedom was more similar to that of a teenager in the 1930s than a teenager in in 2023. You had your telephone that was bolted to the wall. You had your jalopy you'd fix up, and that would be your way of getting out of the house, and you'd drive aimlessly in circles with your friends on a Saturday night looking for something to do. I mean, it was very, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s ish, no internet. Um, for a while in my upbringing, there was not even VCRs. I remember when we got our first VCR. Otherwise, you just saw movies when you saw them. So, I'm only 45, but in a lot of ways, my upbringing was so very different from kids now. And the pandemic, I'm trying to make sense of what that has done to our kids and their psyches. Um, I worked as a prosecutor for the state of Tennessee for almost a decade. I referred to that when talking about the grown up job I got. And I talk about that when I visit schools and talk to kids. And it used to be before the pandemic, I would just get question after question, these kids wanting to hear, terrible, gruesome, gory stories of death and mayhem. And notably now, I never get questions about it anymore. And it's so strange to me. And I'm trying to figure out if it's that these kids have just seen so much darkness and they're looking for escape from darkness, and they've seen so much death and loss, and they just don't want to talk about it anymore. But yeah, all of this is a very long-winded way of saying that the experience that teenagers are going through now is one that is foreign to me in so many ways, and I'm trying to make sense of it.
There's a lot of disengagement in today's world for the teenagers, and uh, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and everything was very bright eyed until suddenly the Vietnam War came, and the protests came, and the social upheaval came. And I can see some similarities in the reactions of the people, of the teens, to that type of a world. It's very disillusioning, and I think one of the adult mistakes is not seeing the pain, whether it's subtle, whether it's hidden, wherever it is that the teenagers are feeling, because that disengagement is hard to process when you're barely 21 years old. It's you're supposed to be thinking that you have your whole life in front of you and everything is rosy and wonderful, and sometimes it isn't. And I think your characters bring some of that upheaval to the teenager, who then can say, gee, I'm feeling the same way.
I certainly hope that's the case. I certainly hope it speaks to them in that way. I just do the best I can. I write the best story I can. I try to access that emotional memory of being a teenager and write from that place. I hope that experience is universal enough to teenagedom that I'm able to offer something that speaks to their world.
Now, when you prepare to write a novel, do you go through a certain process, and does it vary at all? And did you gain a little bit more refinement as you wrote more and more of your pieces?
So the ways that ideas for novels come to me vary pretty widely, But the actual process, once I've got that seed of an idea, is always the same. And it is dictated by my lack of training as a novelist. I've never had a creative writing class. I really don't know what I'm doing writing a novel, even though I have written um, 4 published novels, 1 unpublished novel, 2 novels that are under contract and will be published. Even though all of that, I still don't feel confident in my ability to write a novel. So here is my process. The first thing I start with is the idea. From that idea arises situations that fascinate me and people who fascinate me. And I start with the people who fascinate me. Those will become my characters, because the only way I can make it through writing a 330-page book is if I am deeply invested in these characters emotionally. And what I have to do is I have to allow those characters to become real people to me, because the only way I know how to write a novel is to sit across from somebody and say to them, tell me who you are. Tell me about yourself. Tell me who you love, who loves you, what you desire, what you fear, all the things that make you a story embodied in a human being. And I'll just write those down, and that will become our story. I don't know how to tell anybody their story to them. I could never tell you, Joseph Pizzo, your story, but I could listen as you tell me your story. And I've always figured if I could do that with real people, I can do it with fictional people, as long as they become real in my mind. So I invite those characters into my head. They just live there for months, becoming real to me, speaking to me, telling me who they are. And from there, I start to tease out the threads of a plot. I start to lay that over a plot structure, and I start building my story from there. But it is all character driven. I hear a lot that my plots are slow, my stories are slow, and guilty as charged. I don't I don't write these kind of very plotty, page turning thriller type stories. I think I write very quiet character studies about uh, very normal people, normal emotions.
So, with your novels, was there one that was the most challenging to write, or one that was maybe the easiest to write?
The one that was probably the easiest to write was my first one, The Serpent King. And what made that easy was I was writing in a space of zero expectation. Nobody outside of myself had any expectations that I would deliver a novel. I didn't tell anybody I was working on a novel. I really had no particular expectations for myself. I was coming off kind of the failure of a musical career. I just assumed that my creative life was done, but I was going to have this one last gasp at it. So I just decided to have fun with it and let my imagination do what it would do. And it was tremendously enjoyable to see that childlike imagination that I had, where I could create worlds and imaginary friends and people, wasn't gone from me. I had just put it up in the attic in a chest, and I was able to get it back out and shake the dust off it and use it again. And it was really exciting. And again, that book just gave me an entree into this wonderful world of writing for young adults. It was an entree into the world of writing for adults now. Um, so that was my favorite one to write. Now, since that book, I feel like I've become a better writer. I feel like I've become a better novelist, to where I think my latest book, In the Wild Light, is probably my best book if I had to name one, just because of the things that I've learned through trial and error. But The Serpent King was my favorite to write.
As I mentioned in my intro, you have a forthcoming debut novel for the adult market, Colton Gentry's Third Act. Obviously, your target audience is shifting. Was there a reason that you decided to shift a little bit and maybe go outside the norm? And what motivated that?
Well, there were a few things. The first is that after 4 young adult novels, I've said a lot of what I had to say to young adults. I feel temporarily satisfied. And at the same time, there were stories where I wanted to say things that I couldn't say in a young adult book. I wanted to talk about the kind of loss and reassessment of life that goes on at middle age. The main character of Colton Gentry's third act is 38. The story takes place in alternating timelines between 1995, when he was a teenager. So I did sneak a little YA book into the book, and 2015, when he's an adult contending with the loss of his country music career after an ill-advised anti-gun rant on stage during an arena show, which went as well for him as a mainstream country artist as you might expect. But for all of the wonderful things that you can write about in the young adult space, the one thing you can't really write about is recovering from alcoholism and divorce at age 38. There are not many 17-year-olds who know what it's like to be a 38-year-old recovering from divorce, alcoholism, the shambles of a career, 20 years invested into something that's all come out to naught. You just can't tell that story in the young adult space. So I wanted to tell that story. It had to be a book for adults.
Now, all authors get the itch to write somewhere. And sometimes we realize where it came from and sometimes not. So let me ask you, did you write much as a child? And did you ever envision when you were a child that you would become an author?
I did write as a child. I had a wonderful creative writing teacher in grade school named Mrs. Wheeler, who got us writing stories. I wrote stories. I love them. It was so much fun. But like I said at the beginning, the thought of doing it professionally as an author was just foreign to me. It was one thing to write a little story for Mrs. Wheeler's class. It was another thing to presume that I could write a whole novel and get it published. That was just absolutely unthinkable to me. And that really required me to live and move through the world and see that authors are pretty normal people. They are people who are able to finish what they start, which is a rarer characteristic than I guess I had realized. So they have to be people who can finish what they start. They have to be people who are willing to take the right amount of criticism to allow them to become stronger and to grow and to refine their craft. But other than that, it's not a magical thing that only an elite select few can do. You can put in the work, you can put in the time and the sweat and become a published author. It's not actually that hard.
Now, you've mentioned that Stephen King is your favorite. You mentioned it earlier in this interview. And you love to read as a youngster. Has that passion for reading influenced both your musical talent as well as your writing talent?
It definitely influenced me as a songwriter. I'm also a big Cormac McCarthy fan, and I love the way he uses language. I love the way he shows the possibility of language, these kind of stark, beautiful, terrible images he provides, and I tried to do that in my songwriting. So he was a big influence in my songwriting. What I learned as a youth and as a reader is that if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. You have to fill your mind with good writing. You have to fill your mind with great sentences, so that when you go to that well, as a writer, there's something there. Reading is a way of filling that well.
Now, what do you find has been your biggest challenge so far as a writer? The one thing that you really have to climb that mountain for?
It's actually doing the work. I get these ideas, and then the ideas develop and flower in my mind, and they're perfect. And they only become imperfect when they're in my very imperfect hands appearing on the screen of my laptop. So it's actually forcing myself to take the idea from theoretical and ephemeral and, existing in that perfect space of intangibility and making it something tangible, and then dealing with my shortcomings as an author and seeing it come out on the page so much less grand than I had envisioned it, so much more imperfect than I had envisioned it. That's the challenging part to me. But unless you do that, there's no book. So if the choice is keep the perfect ephemeral idea, or just go ahead and put the messy thing on the page, I choose put the messy thing on the page. But it's always a challenge getting myself to that point.
And that seems to be one of the ways around writer's block. And a lot of authors, whether they're professional or amateur, experienced or inexperienced, deal with writer's block. Do you have any tips for our listeners who might be going through that angst of having writer's block and just not knowing how to overcome it?
Yeah, I do. I would say to embrace the value of boredom. So we live in a time when it's very easy to never be bored. We all carry around smartphones that provide us instantaneous access to basically the whole of human knowledge and creation. And so, really, you don't even have to be bored for 5 minutes. But the thing with boredom is it puts us in a space to receive. When we become bored, our minds become hungry. When our minds become hungry, they produce food to feed themselves, and that food often takes the form of inspiration, ideas, plot lines, ways around writer's block. The paths around writer's block are the paths that your mind is forced to come up with when it's cooking itself food in the kitchen to relieve the hunger of boredom. So I try to access that space of boredom by going on long walks where I don't take my phone with me. I don't listen to anything. I just walk and just look at the world, and it allows my mind to become quiet and hungry and to produce that food to feed itself. So I come back from a long walk with some solution to a writing problem every time. Maybe it's not the exact writer's block I'm confronting at that moment, but it's always something.
Now, I know that there are a lot of folks who want to write their own books, and some will throw up their hands and say, "Well, I've sent to publishers, and I can't get their ear." Others will say, "Well, you can publish independently." No, 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 I don't want to do that. Or, yeah, maybe I'll try that. What would your advice be to these folks? Should they be going through all of these steps, or maybe just write?
I would say just write and get as many smart people to critique your work as you can. Um, look for the gaps in your writing. Look for the ways that you can improve. Read books about craft. Read excellent books. Read books that have won awards for their writing. But above all, be patient. Know that many, if not a majority of published authors have multiple unpublished novels in a desk drawer. I know many authors who have 5, 6, 7 unpublished novels before they finally got a published novel. I know authors who published 3 or 4 novels that were not successful at all before becoming massive bestsellers. So it's all just a matter of time. If you give up, you will not succeed. That is the guarantee. If you give up, you will not succeed. So I say just give yourself space. Don't try to force things. Don't try to tell stories that you are not equipped to tell. Don't try to chase trends. Remember that publishing, there's a lag time of several years. So the trends that are happening right now, the books that are huge now, are ideas that people had 5 or 6 years ago, because it takes 2 years for a book to hit shelves from the time that it's acquired by an editor. So remember that there's that lag time. And if you try to chase a trend in published books, you're going to end up 3 years too late. So write the stories that you feel deeply, write the stories of your heart, and just trust that one of these days it will happen for you.
It sounds to me that you're saying be honest and follow your vision, follow your passion, and the integrity of that will be more important than following that trend, which is ephemeral at best.
Absolutely. Good way of putting it.
Now, I know a lot of folks would like to have you come in and maybe work with their students or they'd like to reach out to you on social media, how may they do that, Jeff?
So I'm on social media, mostly at Instagram at Jeff Zentner, JeffZentner. Don't rob me of one of my N's or you won't get there. I'm also on Twitter at Jeff Zentner. I'm on Facebook at Jeff Zentner Author. If you want to book me for speaking engagements, you can contact the Author Village at theauthorvillage.com. But those are all ways you can get in touch with me, and I check those ways. I try to be active on social media. I love to hear from readers who liked my books. If you didn't like my books, you can keep that to yourself. I don't particularly need to hear that, but I love to hear from folks.
Any final words for our listeners?
No, only that it was an honor to do this, Joseph. I really appreciate what you do. You're so insightful and emotionally generous, and this has been a lot of fun for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, Jeff Zentner, thank you for taking an author's journey with us today. And you're definitely a dedicated author and a wonderful individual who's accomplished in the field of music as well as literature. The thing that impresses me most, I knew from the first time I met you at the Becker Awards, is the sincerity that you have. You speak from your heart, and that's as important as anything, not just for an author, but for any human being. So I salute you for that, Jeff.
Thank you. It was an honor.
We appreciate you sharing with us your insights into the fields of music and writing. And it's time now to end this interview. So that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For An Author's Journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.